That morning, Henry was just walking Shadow, his aging service dog, across the plaza to drop his daughter Gwen off at school. His worn jacket made him look out of place among the luxury cars surrounding Alexandra, the CEO signing a security contract in front of cameras. Alexandra glanced over and let out a mocking comment. The crowd erupted in laughter. Henry stayed silent until Shadow stopped short, growling low. A man pulled a gun from the crowd, and every laugh died instantly. The morning had started like any other. Henry woke before dawn, the habits of his former life still governing his routines even years after leaving the service. 5:30 every morning, he checked the leash, running his fingers along the nylon webbing for frays or weak points. He inspected Shadow's paws for signs of arthritis, watching for the subtle flinch that meant the old dog was in pain. At 10 years old, Shadow was well past his prime for active duty. The muscles that had once rippled beneath his dark coat had softened with age. His muzzle was graying, and sometimes he needed a moment to stand after lying down for too long. But those instincts, the ones that had saved lives in combat zones halfway around the world, were still sharp. Henry knew it, even if he rarely acknowledged it anymore. He'd trained Shadow himself, back when they were both younger, both serving in a canine unit that operated in places civilians didn't hear about on the news. They'd been a team, synchronized in ways that went beyond commands and obedience. Shadow had been his partner, his early warning system, his lifeline. Then came the incident that ended both their careers. An operation gone wrong, politics and blame, sealed files that Henry wasn't allowed to discuss. The military had thanked him for his service and shown him the door with a handshake and a pension that barely covered rent. Shadow came with him, at least. Retired from active duty, but still carrying the skills that had made him invaluable. Now Henry worked construction when he could find it, picking up day jobs that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. He avoided crowds when possible. Crowds meant questions, recognition, people who might remember news stories from years ago. Henry didn't want anyone recognizing him from his days in uniform. Didn't want to explain why a decorated handler was living paycheck to paycheck with a daughter to raise alone. But today, the plaza was unavoidable. Gwen's school bus stop sat on the far side, tucked behind a row of office buildings that had been renovated for the city's ongoing downtown renewal project. The normal route, quiet side streets that Henry preferred, was blocked for construction. Orange cones and barriers had appeared overnight, forcing pedestrians to detour through the main plaza. The detour would add 20 minutes they didn't have. Gwen's bus didn't wait for anyone, and missing it meant Henry would have to walk her the full 3 miles to school, making him late for the job he'd lined up for the day. So Henry tightened his grip on Shadow's leash and moved through the gathering crowd with his head down, his daughter's small hand tucked safely in his other palm. Gwen trusted him completely. At 7 years old, she'd seen enough of the world to know it wasn't always safe, but she believed her father could handle anything. Henry carried that trust like a weight, determined never to let her down the way life had let him down. He'd taught Gwen one rule above all others. If you see danger, you stand behind me. She'd nodded solemnly when he first told her, her wide eyes taking in the weight of his words. She was 7 years old, but she understood that her father wasn't like other dads. She'd seen the scars on his arms, heard him wake from nightmares he never explained. On the far side of the plaza, Alexandra stood beneath a banner emblazoned with her company's logo, a sleek shield design that promised protection and innovation. She was launching SmartGuard, a new crowd security system that used artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to identify threats before they materialized. The technology represented 3 years of development and $30 million in investor funding. The press loved her. She embodied success, sharp suit tailored to perfection, confident posture honed through years of boardroom battles, a smile that never wavered even when the cameras stopped rolling. She'd built her company from nothing, Or at least that's what the profile said. The truth was more complicated, but Alexandra had learned to control her narrative the same way she controlled everything else in her life. She hired the best people, paid them well, and expected flawless execution. Her rise through the tech industry had been meteoric, fueled by smart investments, aggressive marketing, and an instinct for what clients wanted before they knew they wanted it. But success had come with blinders. Alexandra rarely left her controlled environments, boardrooms, luxury hotels, private cars with tinted windows. She'd stopped seeing the world the way most people experienced it. Her perspective had narrowed to profit margins and market share, and somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that security systems were meant to protect real people, not just generate revenue. Beside her stood Ingrid, her public relations director, whispering reminders into her ear. Everything has to be clean. No mistakes. The investors are watching the live stream. Carter, the head of security, stood with his arms crossed, surveying the perimeter with the calm arrogance of someone who believed his systems were flawless. "The perimeter is locked down," he said into his radio. "No one gets through." But Henry was already through, slipping along the edge of the crowd with Shadow at his heels. A security guard stepped forward, hand raised. "Sir, you can't be here. This is a private event." Henry gestured toward the far side of the plaza. "I'm just passing through with my daughter. School bus is over there." The guard hesitated, but Carter's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Get him out of the frame. We can't have anyone ruining the shot." Alexandra turned at the commotion, her gaze landing on Henry and his worn jacket, the old dog limping slightly at his side. She didn't see a father trying to get his daughter to school. She saw a disruption, someone trying to get attention, maybe even looking for a handout. "Maybe he thought this was a good place to ask for donations," she said, loud enough for the nearest cameras to catch. The crowd laughed. Ingrid smiled, pleased with the spontaneous moment that would make Alexandra seem relatable, human. Amanda, one of Alexandra's junior executives, stood at the edge of the group. She watched Henry more carefully than the others. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't even looking at the stage. He was just pulling his daughter along, trying to leave as quickly as possible. Something about the moment didn't sit right with her, but she said nothing. Henry felt the heat rise in his face, but he kept moving. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He wouldn't let Gwen see him angry or humiliated. But Shadow had stopped moving. The dog's ears were up, his body tense, his nose working the air with sharp, deliberate sniffs. Henry glanced down, recognizing the shift immediately. Shadow had detected something. Not food. Not another animal. Something wrong. Carter approached, flanked by 2 guards. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area. For your own safety." Henry's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to. Just let me get to the other side. Not through here. Go around. That'll take 20 minutes. My daughter will miss her bus." Carter's expression didn't change. "Not my problem." Shadow barkled, low and steady, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. Henry's hand moved instinctively to the dog's collar, fingers brushing the short fur at his neck. It was a gesture so subtle that no one else noticed, a signal from their years of working together. Shadow responded immediately, his growl cutting off as he shifted his weight, redistributing his stance into something more controlled, more ready. His eyes scanned the crowd with the methodical precision of a trained detector. Not random fear, but focused assessment. Henry followed the dog's gaze and saw him. A man standing 30 feet away, half hidden behind a cluster of bystanders who were watching the stage presentation. His posture was wrong too stiff, shoulders held in a way that suggested something concealed. Too focused on angles rather than the spectacle everyone else was watching. His hand rested near his waistband, and his eyes weren't on the stage where Alexandra was speaking. They were measuring distances, tracking exits, calculating sight lines. Henry had seen that look before, in places where tension preceded violence. The man's weight distribution was off, suggesting he carried something heavy on his right side. His jacket hung awkwardly, bulging slightly where it shouldn't, and most telling, his attention kept drifting to a specific area near the stage, not Alexandra herself, but the technical equipment zone where cameras and computers processed the demonstration. Henry turned back to Carter. "There's someone in the crowd. I think he's armed." Carter blinked, then let out a short laugh that carried more contempt than humor. "You're trying to tell me how to do my job? I've got 20 years in private security, a team of 12 professionals, and a perimeter that's been locked down since 6 this morning. I'm telling you to check the man in the gray jacket, 10 o'clock from the stage. We've already swept everyone who came through the checkpoints. Bag searches, metal detectors, background checks for anyone with credentials. There's no threat here that we haven't accounted for. Then he got in before your perimeter, or he's got credentials. Either way, look at him. His positioning is wrong." Carter's expression hardened. "I need you and your dog out of this area. You're creating a distraction, and you're making my team nervous. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have you escorted out." Ingrid stepped closer, her smile tight and professional, but her eyes were cold. "Can we please handle this quietly? The cameras are still rolling, and our investors are watching the live stream. Any disruption right now could cost us millions in contracts." Henry's frustration spiked, but he forced it down. Getting angry wouldn't help Gwen, wouldn't help anyone. He pulled his daughter closer, shifting his stance so his body was between her and the man he'd spotted. Shadow's muscles coiled tighter underneath his coat, the dog's entire body vibrating with tension. Henry felt the leash strain against his palm, the nylon cutting into his skin. The man, Otis, though Henry didn't know his name, yet moved slightly, his hand drifting toward his waistband. His eyes flicked toward the stage, but not at Alexandra. He was watching someone else, someone moving through the crowd near the technical area where the equipment was set up. Henry's mind worked quickly, pulling from years of training. This wasn't random. The positioning was too deliberate. If Otis wanted to target Alexandra, he'd be closer to the stage, not angled toward the equipment. This was something else. A distraction, maybe. A way to create chaos while someone else moved unseen. Shadow lunged forward, the leash jerking in Henry's hand. The dog's bark shattered the polite murmur of the crowd, sharp and commanding. Heads turned. Carter spun, his hand moving to his radio, and then Otis pulled the gun. The metal caught the morning light, a flash of chrome that turned every head in the plaza. Someone screamed. The sound rippled outward, panic spreading like a shockwave. The crowd surged backward, bodies colliding, people stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape. Alexandra froze. For the first time in years, she had no script, no plan, no control. She stood on the stage, her polished image cracking as the reality of the moment crashed over her. This wasn't supposed to happen. Carter had promised her the perimeter was secure. The system was supposed to catch threats before they materialized. But the system had failed. And now a man with a gun stood in the middle of her event, his finger near the trigger. Carter and his team reacted, but too slowly. They'd been watching the perimeter, monitoring the checkpoints, focused on keeping protesters and unauthorized personnel out. They hadn't been watching the crowd already inside. Their cameras had been angled toward the stage, not the blind spots where Otis had positioned himself. Henry's training took over. He dropped into a crouch, pulling Gwen down with him. "Stay behind me. Don't move." She nodded, her small body trembling against his side. Shadow strained at the leash, every muscle in his body locked onto Otis. The dog's focus was absolute, the years of training flooding back despite his age. Henry scanned the area, calculating exit routes, searching for cover. Otis raised the gun, his arm sweeping across the crowd. People screamed, dropping to the ground, covering their heads. The weapon pointed toward the stage, then shifted, angling back toward the crowd. Henry saw it in the man's eyes. Hesitation, uncertainty. Otis wasn't a professional. He was scared, and that made him more dangerous. Henry made a decision. He unclipped Shadow's leash. The dog exploded forward, a blur of dark fur and precise motion. This wasn't the charge of an angry animal acting on instinct. Shadow didn't charge blindly. He moved with the calculated efficiency of a trained service dog, muscles working in perfect coordination despite his age. He closed the distance in seconds, paws finding purchase on the smooth plaza stones, body low to minimize his profile as a target. Otis saw him too late. The man's eyes widened, his training or lack of it failing him in the crucial moment. He tried to swing the gun toward the approaching threat, but Shadow was already airborne, launching himself from 6 feet away with the power that came from years of conditioning that his body still remembered even if time had slowed him down. The impact knocked Otis backward, the dog's 80 pounds of momentum catching him center mass. Shadow's jaws locked around Otis's right wrist with surgical precision, exactly where he'd been trained to bite the gun hand. Always the gun hand. His teeth didn't tear or rip. They applied controlled pressure to the tendons and bones, forcing the fingers to open reflexively. The gun discharged, the crack of the shot deafening in the confined space of the plaza. But Shadow's attack had already altered the angle. The barrel pointed skyward, the bullet disappearing harmlessly into the morning air. Shadow twisted, using his body weight and the momentum of the fall to drag Otis to the ground. The man hit the pavement hard, the breath exploding from his lungs. Shadow maintained pressure on the wrist, his teeth never breaking skin but applying enough force to prevent any chance of Otis regaining control of the weapon. The dog's training was absolute: hold the threat, prevent escalation, wait for the handler's command. The weapon clattered across the pavement, skittering to a stop 15 feet away. Henry was already moving, his body responding before his conscious mind fully processed what Shadow had done. Years of training overrode the hesitation of civilian life. He reached Otis in 3 long strides, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The leash he'd dropped when Shadow attacked now became a tool. He grabbed it and looped it around Otis's wrists, pulling it tight and securing it with a knot that wouldn't slip. It wasn't official restraints, but it would hold. "Shadow, release," Henry commanded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The dog immediately let go, backing off 2 steps but maintaining his focus on Otis, ready to re-engage if the threat renewed itself. Henry checked Otis for other weapons, his hands moving quickly but carefully, patting down the man's jacket, waistband, and ankles. He found nothing else, just a wallet and a phone. He kicked the gun further away, putting more distance between the weapon and anyone who might try to reach it. Carter and his team finally reached them, weapons drawn, shouting commands. But it was over. Otis lay pinned beneath Shadow, his hands bound, his face pressed against the concrete. Alexandra stood frozen on the stage, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. The man she'd mocked, the man she'd dismissed as a nuisance, had just saved her event, possibly her life, and his dog, old, limping Shadow, had moved like a weapon. Then the police arrived, and everything shifted again. The officers saw a man on the ground, another man standing over him with a gun lying nearby. They didn't see a hero. They saw a potential threat. Within seconds, Henry's hands were behind his back, metal cuffs clicking around his wrists. "Wait," he said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I'm not the shooter." I stopped him, but the officers weren't listening. They were following protocol, securing the scene, separating potential suspects. Gwen screamed, reaching for her father as Amanda grabbed her, pulling her back. "Dad!" Gwen's voice cracked with panic, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," Henry called back, his voice steady even as the officers pushed him toward a patrol car. "Just stay with the nice lady. I'll be right back." Shadow barked, trying to follow, but a handler grabbed his collar, pulling him away. The dog resisted, his claws scraping against the pavement, but he was old and tired, and the handler was strong. Alexandra watched it all unfold, her mind struggling to process the disconnect between what she'd seen and what was happening now. Henry had saved them. She'd seen it with her own eyes, and now he was being treated like a criminal. Ingrid appeared at her elbow, her phone already out. "We need to leave, now. Before this becomes a bigger story." But later. "Right now, we need to control the narrative." Carter stood nearby, his face pale. His entire security operation had just collapsed on live television. The perimeter he'd bragged about had been useless. A man with a gun had walked right through, and the only thing that had stopped a massacre was a dog he'd tried to remove from the area. At the precinct, Detective Leon took Henry into an interview room. He was a 30-year veteran, someone who'd seen enough to know when a situation didn't add up. He let Henry sit for a few minutes, then entered with 2 cups of coffee. "You gave an order to that dog," Leon said, settling into his chair. Sounded like K-9 protocol. Henry met his eyes, but said nothing. Leon pulled out a tablet, scrolling through something. "I ran your name. Found some sealed records. Military service, K-9 unit, honorable discharge, but the details are locked. Then you know I'm not a threat. I know you're trained. I also know you were removed from active duty. What I don't know is why." Henry's jaw tightened. "That's in the past." Leon studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "The witnesses are all saying the same thing. You stopped the shooter. Your dog took him down clean. No excessive force, textbook restraint. I've seen trained officers who couldn't have done it better. Then why am I here? Because we need to figure out what happened, and because there are people out there who want to turn this into something it's not." While Henry sat in the interview room, Alexandra stood in her office, staring at the television. Every news station was covering the incident. Some were calling Henry a hero. Others were questioning why he'd been at the event in the first place, speculating about his motives. Ingrid paced behind her, phone pressed to her ear. "We need to get ahead of this. Issue a statement. Something about thanking the brave citizen who assisted our security team." Alexandra turned sharply. "He didn't assist our team. He saved us because our team failed. That's not the story we're telling. It's the truth." Ingrid's expression hardened. "The truth is bad for business. We're launching a security product. If people think our systems don't work, they don't work." Alexandra's voice was quiet but firm. "A man walked into our event with a gun, and we didn't catch him. Henry tried to warn Carter, and Carter dismissed him. We don't know that. I was standing right there. I heard it." Ingrid opened her mouth to argue, but Amanda stepped into the office, her face tight. "Henry's daughter is asking for him. She won't stop crying." Alexandra felt something twist in her chest. She remembered the little girl, the way Henry had pulled her close, shielding her with his body. She remembered the fear in the child's eyes as her father was dragged away in handcuffs. Where is she? Downstairs with building security. Alexandra grabbed her coat. "I'm going to the precinct." "Alexandra, that's not. I'm going." She paused at the door, looking back at Ingrid. "And find out everything you can about Henry. I want to know who he really is." At the precinct, Alexandra had to use every bit of her influence to get past the front desk. When she finally reached Leon, he looked surprised but not displeased. "Miss Reed, didn't expect to see you here. I need to speak with Henry. He's being processed. Should be released within the hour. I want to apologize." Leon raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Alexandra hesitated, then said, "For not seeing him." Leon studied her for a moment, then nodded. He's in room 3. I'll give you 5 minutes. Henry looked up when Alexandra entered, his expression guarded. His hands were no longer cuffed, but he still looked tense, coiled like he was ready to react if needed. I'm sorry, Alexandra said before he could speak. For what I said. For not listening when you tried to warn us. For everything. Henry's expression didn't change. I don't need an apology. What do you need? My daughter. She's probably terrified. She's safe. Amanda's with her. Alexandra sat down across from him, her polished composure cracking. Your dog was hurt. Not badly, but he's limping worse than before. I've arranged for a veterinarian to see him. Henry's jaw tightened. I can't afford. It's covered. Please. For the first time, Henry's guard dropped slightly. Why? Because you saved my life. And because I owe you more than money can pay. Leon appeared in the doorway. You're free to go, Henry. We've got Otis in custody, and he's talking. Henry stood, then paused. What's he saying? Leon's expression darkened. That's the interesting part. He's saying he was paid to cause a distraction, not to hurt anyone specifically. Someone wanted chaos at your event, Miss Reed. The question is why? Alexandra felt her blood run cold. We're checking the security footage now. But if he's telling the truth, someone used the panic to get access to something they shouldn't have. Back at the company headquarters, Carter reviewed the footage with a sinking feeling in his stomach. During the chaos, while everyone was focused on Otis and the gun, someone had entered the technical area. They'd been visible for less than 30 seconds, but that was enough. The prototype security system, the one Alexandra had been demonstrating, was gone. Along with it, the proprietary code and the contract documents. When Alexandra returned to her office, Carter was waiting with the news. Her face went pale as he explained what they'd found. Who had access? She demanded. That's what we're trying to determine. The cameras in that area went offline just before the incident. Offline? That's not a coincidence. Amanda appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. I pulled the access logs. There were only 3 people with clearance to that area during the event. You, Carter, and Clinton. Alexandra's stomach dropped. Clinton. Her vice president of operations. The man she'd passed over for promotion 3 months ago. The man who'd been vocal about his disagreements with the new security system, calling it overpriced and unnecessary. Where is he now? Amanda checked her tablet. He left the building 20 minutes ago. Said he had an emergency meeting with a client. Leon arrived within the hour with a warrant. They traced Clinton's movements through building security and cell tower data. He'd left the plaza during the chaos, heading to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. By the time police surrounded the location, he was already inside, attempting to transfer the stolen data to an encrypted drive. The arrest was clean. Clinton barely resisted, his confidence evaporating the moment he realized he'd been caught. In his car, they found communications with Otis, payment records, and a contract with a rival security firm willing to pay millions for Alexandra's proprietary technology. But there was more. Clinton hadn't just wanted the technology. He'd wanted Alexandra's company to fail. If the demonstration had been disrupted by violence, if her security system had been proven ineffective in the worst possible way, the investors would have pulled their funding. The city contract would have evaporated, and Clinton would have been positioned to swoop in with a better solution, one built on stolen technology. When the full scope of the conspiracy came to light, Alexandra called a press conference. No scripted remarks, no PR filtering. She stood in front of the cameras and told the truth. 3 days ago, a man named Henry tried to warn my security team about a threat. We ignored him. We dismissed him because of how he looked, because we thought we knew better. That mistake almost cost lives. Henry and his dog Shadow stopped an armed man when our systems failed. And while we were celebrating that narrow escape, we missed the real crime, corporate espionage orchestrated by someone I trusted. She paused, her eyes finding the camera. I'm announcing new protocols for our company. Every security concern will be taken seriously, regardless of who raises it. We're also establishing a fund to support retired service dogs and their handlers, because Shadow reminded us that experience and training matter more than appearance or age. The reporters shouted questions, but Alexandra held up her hand. I have one more thing to say. Henry, if you're watching, I'm offering you a position as a security consultant, not because I'm trying to buy forgiveness, but because I need people who see what others miss. You don't have to accept, but the offer stands. 2 days later, Alexandra drove to Henry's apartment herself. No driver, no PR team, no cameras. Just her and a small bag of supplies for Shadow. Gwen answered the door, her eyes going wide. You're the lady from TV. I am, Alexandra said, kneeling to the child's level. Is your dad home? Henry appeared behind his daughter, his expression wary but not hostile. Shadow limped up beside him, his tail wagging slowly when he recognized Alexandra's scent. I brought medicine for Shadow, she said, holding up the bag. And a promise. What kind of promise? That I'll never judge someone based on appearance again. That I'll listen when someone sees danger I don't. And that I'll do everything in my power to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Henry was quiet for a long moment. Teaching my team what you know. Reviewing our protocols. Helping us build something that actually works. I have a daughter. I can't work long hours. Flexible schedule. Remote work when possible. Whatever you need. Gwen tugged on Henry's sleeve. Can we keep Shadow if you work for her? Henry smiled. The first genuine smile Alexandra had seen from him. Shadow's retired, sweetheart. He's staying with us no matter what. Then you should say yes. She seems nice now. Alexandra couldn't help but laugh. Now? You were mean before, Gwen said matter-of-factly. But Dad says people can change if they want to. Henry met Alexandra's eyes. Do you want to change? Yes, she said simply. I do. 3 weeks later, Henry walked across the same plaza where it had all begun. This time, Alexandra walked beside him, and Gwen skipped ahead with Shadow on his leash. The dog moved slower than before, his service days truly behind him, but his head was high. People recognized them. Some waved, others smiled. A few approached to thank Henry for what he'd done. He accepted their words with quiet grace, never making himself the center of attention. When they reached the far side of the plaza, Gwen turned back, looking at the spot where Otis had pulled the gun. Are bad things going to happen again, Dad? Henry knelt beside her. Sometimes. But that's why we pay attention. That's why we help each other. Like you and Shadow helped? Exactly like that. Alexandra watched them, feeling something shift in her chest. She'd built a company worth millions, climbed to the top of her industry, commanded respect from powerful people. But she'd been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who told her what she wanted to hear. Henry had shattered that bubble with nothing but truth and courage. He hadn't asked for recognition or reward. He'd simply done what was right, even when no one believed him. As they walked away from the plaza, Gwen asked, What does that word mean? The one people keep saying about Dad? Which word? Alexandra asked. Hero. Henry shook his head. I'm not a hero, Gwen. I just paid attention when others didn't. But Alexandra knew better. She'd learned the hard way that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or perfect appearances. It was about seeing danger and stepping toward it. It was about protecting the vulnerable even when it cost you something. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the crowd is laughing at you. Shadow looked up at Henry, his dark eyes full of trust and contentment. The old dog had one more lesson to teach the world that worth isn't measured in youth or strength, but in wisdom, loyalty, and the courage to act when it matters most. And in a world obsessed with image and status, that was a lesson everyone needed to learn.